Welcome to the 101st episode of The Patrick Coffin Show, brought to you by Coffin Nation. You get these cool swag mugs and other things. Members-only premium content by joining Coffin Nation. The doors are open. The wait is over. The door is going to stay open until Monday, November 26, 2018. That's the Monday after Thanksgiving weekend. Go to coffinnation.com and find out more about what benefits and blessings you get as a member of this fast-growing online community for members-only premium content, commentary with a Catholic lens, lots of satire, fun, but mostly faith and culture building. We have a blast, and we want you to join us. You also get cool swag like this mug. Tim Hortons coffee, delicious. So sign up to coffinnation.com, and I do hope to see you on the inside. Today's guest is both a sage and a survivor. His rise to global fame and infamy earned him a lot of fans and a lot of foes. Today we're going to talk about his rise and his fall. More importantly, his present and future, and his new book called Diabolical, right here on the Patrick Coffin Show as we go unplugged and uncensored with Milo Yiannopoulos and set the record straight. Yes, straight. Milo Yiannopoulos is a New York Times bestselling author, an international political celebrity, to say the least, a free speech warrior, and a confirmed Louis Vuitton addict. He forced me to say that. His first book is called Dangerous. It sold over 200,000 copies despite a blanketed media ignoramus campaign. His latest book is called Diabolical, How Pope Francis Has Betrayed Clerical Abuse Victims Like Me and Why He Has Got to Go. Milo, welcome to the Patrick Coffin Show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I have learned that it is well worth taking your time to send in some biographical information. That was an excellent introduction, 10 out of 10.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes.
And congratulations. You texted me something extraordinarily rude, which really got my attention. Well, it wasn't rude, but it was attention-grabbing, saying, you want to come and talk about your book or what? And I was like, I really don't give interviews anymore. I just don't. I'm going to put my book out. I'm going to, send stuff to the fans, do stuff on social media, but I'm really not interested in interviews anymore. And you have coaxed me out of my safe space. So
wow,
thank you.
Well, thank you. I have some quinoa salad and a smoothie if you feel triggered at all. Like my use of the word straight at the top of the show, set the record straight. But thank you for coming. I know you've been through an awful lot in the last year, and I'm sure you're gun shy to get in front of people who are going to misquote you and take samples of what you say and misquote them and tell outright lies. Let me just say at the beginning that a lot of people did not want me to reach out to you and to make any kind of contact. Why are you destroying your brand? Why are you inviting an alt-right, white supremacist, Nazi? Those are the common ones. Oh, of course, cheerleader for pedophilia. We're going to get into all those charges and drill into the book. But you and I have several things in common. One, I'm also a subject of the British Crown. I'm a Canadian citizen with a green card in this great country. As a non-American, I love America, very pro-America. This is just a fantastic place to live and to raise a family. And I feel like an outsider insider. Growing up with Monty Python's Flying Circus and Tim Brooke Taylor and the BBC World News and so on, it's very different from the more Amerocentric media environment here. Do you feel like an outsider who's also an insider?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of like de Tocqueville's or Hitchenses, right? Every generation there's a little cluster of foreigners that come to America that Americans seem to forget how great they are on a periodic basis. Sometimes, inside a year, they need telling again and again and again, and they need reminding over and over again why their country's great and how to keep it that way. So like small children, you can tell them not to put their hand in the fire and they'll remember for 5 minutes, but then they'll go back again, In the end, you just have to do it once or twice, but always they need an adult in the room. Mm-hmm. And I sort of feel that way about our dear, sweet American brothers and sisters. They just need saving from themselves repeatedly. Usually by Europeans and apparently by a Canadian once in a while too.
Well, you're also a verbophile. I notice your use of words like otiose, which is appreciated from fellow verbophiles. Otiose being of useless purpose or result, right?
Well, I mean, what's the point of being a writer otherwise? I mean, the standard of public debate is so low. The thing that annoys me, one of the things that annoys me more than almost anything else about the modern progressive left, about the left in general, is how dull and repetitive their language is, how they flattened not just scholarly inquiry, but the entire galaxy, the universe of the language of academic inquiry itself. You now can only interrogate things in a number of very limited ways, using a number of very limited words. And these words sound extraordinary and elaborate and exciting, but actually there's only 20 of them. Once you know what intersectional and problematic and all the rest of it mean, you realize they're gesturing at the same couple of discredited lunatic political positions rather than anything that's actually going to be remotely enlightening. And it's led to this deadening and flattening and oversimplification of language in the public sphere. Now, whenever journalists kind of reach for something bigger or greater or more complex than the immediate subject matter they're talking about, they no longer have the language of religion or holiness to draw on. Instead, they're drawing on this tiny little lexicon of dull as ditch water social justice buzzwords. One of the things I hate about them the most is how they've destroyed language in that way. And to say nothing of the way they routinely police it to take jokes and to take words out of the language they don't like as well. So I try, rather than just whining about it like most conservatives, I try to show by doing and make sure my books are kind of overloaded with things that have you running to the dictionary, because it's fun, it's joyous.
Well, yeah, you guys invented the language, so you have a right to play the role of teacher to a certain degree. There's a whole new lexicon. It's like a jukebox that only has 3 or 4 songs on it. Like you just mentioned, intersectional. That's not really a word. It just sort of cropped up and that became current. Triggered, alt. Everything's alt something. These are brand new concepts.
Yeah, I mean, intersectional just means your life is crap for a number of reasons. And the alt thing used to be positive. I mean, talk about alt fanzines and all the rest. In the 90s, the 80s, it was positive because it indicated counterculture, and counterculture, of course, was always a desirable aspirational value for the left, right the way through to probably the 90s, when political correctness reared its head in the mid 90s, and suddenly to be alternative or to be dissident or mischievous was to risk trampling on the norms of political correctness. Then it became more socially dangerous. And prior to that, it had always been always been a kind of like cult kind of aspiration. And now, of course, to be alternative is completely verboten unless you're alternative within a very narrow and specific set of opinions, which aren't really alternative at all when on the cover of Time magazine. Yeah. So it's this alt thing it's interesting how alt-right is the first expression that has been used negatively. All the previous alts were positive, precisely because we've moved from a culture that appreciates dissidence and mischief and defiance and independence to one that prizes conformity above all else. So therefore, of course, anything that is alternative is by nature defective rather than just disruptive.
Well, give the mainstream media credit for providing one tsunami after another of propagandizing and attacking an idea. I didn't really have much truck with the alt-right before Charlottesville, but it seems like what happened at Charlottesville was really the hammer coming down on the destruction of that whole brand and just turning it into a swear word, period, with no defenders.
Well, yeah, I mean, so when I was at Breitbart, I co-wrote what was probably the most important piece of political journalism that year in 2016, which was an establishment conservative's guide to the alt-right. And at that time, it was an expression that meant a lot of different people. People who didn't like political correctness, anti-feminists, what we call cultural libertarians, another term that I invented at Breitbart, which describes people who, are like Dave Rubin, who are sort of aggressive, see, do, be, say whatever you want kind of people, where I started, although I'm drifting towards some kind of Catholic theocrat or whatever. But
the Catholic theocrats are coming. The Catholic theocrats are coming.
No, I've realized free speech isn't all it's cracked up to be. We just need the church back. But at that time, alt-right was a shorthand for a variety of different countercultural impulses, instincts that resisted a lot of the authoritarian, technocratic, globalist, elite center. Over time, however, the small racist rump of the alt-right, which we always acknowledged was there, which I said was 2-4% of the movement or whatever, came to be associated with the whole. And ordinary, sensible people like me, like most others who initially quite liked the term, gradually started to just distance themselves from it because it came to mean something different. And now I think the young Trump supporters, the anti-political correctness activists, the feminist haters, now they've called something like new right, or we don't have a word for it because the press ruined the term that I think that I quite helpfully defined in 2016. So Now that it does mean racist, obviously I have no sympathy for it and no association with it or fondness for it whatsoever. But at the time in 2016, although I never said I was alt-right, I merely described the movement. That was enough to get me, thrown on the pyre. But at the time, it was a perfectly useful shorthand for a variety of anti-establishment forces that were rising on the populist right.
Well, some concepts and images get completely co-opted. If the people who control the broad narrative are in control, then their premises and their presuppositions are going to rule supreme. You can't see a rainbow anymore without thinking LGTB symbol. When you look at if you scroll. What's that?
Even I can. I feel sorry for you. No, you got to break that one. Look, this is what cognitive behavioral therapists will tell you this. Don't give up. Because the one thing you can always do is overwrite bad memories with good new ones. And if just because culture is forcing, it's like I'll be back, or these phrases that are popular from movies, and sometimes there'll be like a laugh line on a sitcom, be like, that's never going to be usable again, is it? Nope. You can overwrite this stuff with new memories and new associations. That's sad. No, because rainbows are beautiful and gorgeous. No, even I don't think that. But then I don't spend a lot of time thinking about LGBT stuff or gays in general.
We're going to get there, and I want to turn to the Catholic thing too. I tweeted the day that Obergefell Hodges passed. I said, God called. He wants his rainbow back. But it takes time. But I agree with you that there's a kind of a plasticity to the brain, and over time you can kind of rewrite scripts. Look at the Madonna, right? For a whole generation, no Catholic priest would dare preach a homily on the Madonna because of the Italian singer who sang like a virgin. But nowadays, no one under 30 knows who Madonna is.
But that's cowardice. That's precisely my point. That's just capitulation and cowardice. I mean, the only way to do it is like, we're going to talk about Madonna. No, not that Madonna, and you're done. And then you can give your speech then you can give your speech like you were always going to. Is that so hard? No, this is the utter capitulation and cowardice from our religious leaders, from all other kinds of leaders, to this sort of reworking of language and this.
Sure.
The perfect example of an utterly unnecessary kind of self-policing that isn't even political. It's just like we feel like outshone by the stardom of give me a break. I mean, Mary's the key to our entire, to the entire universe, right? She's unlocks the mysteries of the world, our world, and the one to come. And you're going to not give a sermon because you're afraid of being afraid people are going to think that you're talking about a pop star. Give me a break. These people only win because we let them.
I know the correct answer to this question is through baptism, but I wanted to ask you how you became the Catholic that you are. How did you get introduced to the faith? Were you baptized as an infant, or did you come in your teen years to have this encounter with Christ and decide, look, Jesus is into monogamy, not polygamy. He founded one church. How did you come to that insight?
So I was raised Catholic by my paternal grandmother, who was one of vanishingly few Greek Catholics, like not Orthodox, but actual Catholics.
I see.
So a couple of percent. My mother's like German Jewish, so that side there was nothing. But on my paternal grandmother's side, I was initially raised Catholic, but then I kind of drifted away from it in my 20s when I was doing all the kinds of things that people do in their 20s. Drifted very, very far from a state of grace, let's say. And then I suppose two things happened really. When I got to 30, I realized I needed to pull my life together, and I went out in search of things that would help me do that, whether it was people, books, faith, all the rest of it. And I started drifting very strongly, not drifting really, but sprinting back towards faith. And the second thing, which is more controversial, which is the subject of some of chapter 2 of my book, and what I'm sure we'll talk about, is that I fell in love. And I fell in love with somebody who who strictly speaking is not the right kind of person to fall in love with. But my experience of it was that it made me a better Catholic, which some people are going to find a horrendous statement, and very, very controversial and offensive. But I can only tell you how it made me feel, at least. And so that's a very complicated subject. But the truth is that I after a sort of 28 or 29 years worth of spiritual barrenness, I fell in love, and it opened me up. I very firmly believe that the love that I have for that person opened me up to God's love too. And that really is heretical and horrendous thing to say for traditionalist Catholics. But it is my experience.
We're commanded to love. When people say, you don't want gay people to love each other, actually they're commanded to love each other. So no matter how disordered or out of context or whatever it is, human love does have the shade of God, who is love. It's certainly present there. It could be present even in an adulterous relationship in some way.
I had a little splinter, a little shard of what it might have meant to love God when my grandmother died. And she, we gave her a nice Catholic funeral because none of the rest of the family cared too much. But I made sure that she had the Catholic funeral she wanted. Immediately before she died, she was unconscious for a couple of days, and I inserted my hand into hers and to say goodbye, and felt it just tighten slightly.
Yeah.
Seconds before the machine started going crazy, and it was the most horrifying, but also the most incredible experience of my life. Tears were streaming down my face for 2 days, and I didn't know what had happened. I realized that she was on some level, somewhere, somehow aware and able to say goodbye just in that little way. And that really is what kind of that gave me a little shot of it. It sort of made me, I think, more emotionally available than I'd been prior to that, when I was involved in a lot of, you can imagine the kind of behavior, London, young, good-looking, wealthy London, heyday of gay clubbing. You can, fill in the dots yourself if you have to look. But that really opened me up to, I don't think perhaps I had much of an idea what love was before that. And that's, I guess, what started the journey for me, was when she died.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that. I lost my father this past April, so I know what that abrupt, scalding goodbye feels like. It's funny how, to this day, it'll hit me at odd times. Maybe that's the same with you. It'll just come on me. I can't call my dad. I can't get his take on things. I can't hear him.
I have teacups, so I try to just hold on to a little bit of London in America, and I live in Miami, which is like the most unlike Europe.
It's the anti-London.
No, it's like the anti-London. Everything is like marble and clean and white boxes and lots of like whatever. But I have this like nice hand painted like gold leaf bone china teapot and cups and saucers, because I try to have like afternoon tea properly. I just try a little bit of London in this crazy hell. And every time I do, it's like. Personally, because that was always the thing that I did with her. She used to take me up to Claridge's, is kind of like the Ritz, is a big fancy hotel in London, and she used to take me for afternoon tea, which in Britain doesn't mean just a cup of tea. It means little finger sandwiches and scones and jam and all the rest of it. And she took me every 2 weeks up to Claridge's, which is a terribly self-indulgent and luxurious thing to do every 2 weeks. So there's little times at which you get caught by it,
How did you broaden the faith that you had, obviously through baptism and the other sacraments, but then at some point you began to think of the Catholic roots of the West, from the Magna Carta to the U.S. Constitution to the big picture of what do we mean by Western civilization? And you've rightly pointed out, and there's shades of it in the book Diabolical, which we'll talk about, that Catholicism is the idea, the West is the practice. How did you begin thinking along those lines?
Well, it started when I got things wrong in 2016, thinking that the basis of Western civilization was freedom of expression and free speech. And I became, historically speaking, Steve Bannon and I just kind of came up with this thing, like, what if I do free speech on college campuses, because the left hates that, and that'll be really effective in the election. And it worked. And now everyone on the conservative right in America is like banging on about free speech all the time, which makes me laugh, because it's just something that I made up in 2015 to go on tour with. And now, but it was just really, it was tactical for me at the time. And of course I believe that it is one of the underpinning principles, but it isn't the only one, and it isn't the most important one. And the more that I've been thinking about that, and it's involved in that has been an intellectual friendship that I've developed with a professor at the University of Chicago, Rachel Fulton Brown, who's been through her own social justice hell, who is a Catholic, a historian of Mary. And
I've high-fived her on Twitter. I'm a fan.
Right. And a few other friends that I've made, even in DC, believe it or not, who are Catholics, who I won't put anyone in the fire. I've got the books upstairs, but in the acknowledgements of the book, I say I try not to damage my friends by associating myself with them publicly.
That's why I'm grinning. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are a few other friends, who over time and learning and them telling me, oh, you should read this and all the rest of it. I've late in life stumbled upon the mentors I always craved when I was younger, and as I've read more and as I've thought more and as I've experienced more and as I've seen more, I've realized it isn't capitalism, it isn't English language, it's not free speech, it's not democracy, it's God. It's God, and the Catholic Church specifically, which is the underpinning, not just of so much. The appendix of my book is about all the things, it's called "What Have the Romans Ever Done for Us?" Haha. It's all the things we got from Catholicism, and it's even down to stuff like our conception of self, like the idea of the individual, and how Christianity, working from the mundane to the transcendent, whether it's a Larkin poem or whatever, how ordinary people became legitimate subjects for artistic inquiry as a result of medieval Catholicism. And that's where you get Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales, but also all of modern literature, with the unremarkable I as the subject, is a product of Christianity working from the mundane to the transcendent, the ordinary, quotidian, everyday being considered worthy of consideration and respect, which is unique to our religious culture, through to all kinds of other things too. It just dawned on me that free speech stuff, yeah, it's true and it's good and it's effective against the crazy left and all the rest of it, but it isn't enough.
And it has a big asterisk next to it. There's no full free speech. Has anyone introduced you yet to Archbishop Fulton Sheen?
I know the name, but I don't think
You're welcome in advance. Milo, Fulton Sheen is my spiritual father.
Okay.
He wrote over 60 books. He died in 1979. He was the first televangelist before it had a bad name. He had an Emmy award-winning TV show with millions of... He knocked Milton Berle off the charts in 1951 he's phenomenal. But
I had something recommended to me that I haven't got around to.
One of the things... I think you'll really, really love him. One of the things he said about free speech, he sort of broadened it out to behavior and thought generally. And he says, the freedom to do whatever you want is not freedom, it's license. And the freedom to do whatever you have to do is communism. It's the freedom to, it's what you ought to do. And that's where true liberty lies.
That's where I know him from, because I've been said that before. Yeah. So I'm going to thank you for the recommendation. I'm going to dig into that.
Yeah.
Certainly, the free speech stuff is effective and it's useful and it works and all the rest of it. But it's the problem that, for instance, Jonathan Haidt, I can never remember which round it is, and Greg Lukianoff have in their book, Coddling of the American Mind. They talk about the damage that the restriction of free speech does to the left-wing students' psychology.
Yeah.
The psychiatric trauma that it can produce in the social justice believing late teen, early 20 something.
Yeah.
But what the book doesn't do, because it can't, is pick a side and explain why the stuff the left's saying is actually wrong. All they really are able to do is give an analysis of how harmful the totalitarian instinct is on human psychology. It doesn't go remotely far enough for me, because it's true as far as it goes, but if you actually want to save Western civilization, Jonathan Haidt isn't going to help you, because all he's doing is saying those products of your opposing side are a psychological mess because of what was going on. You're like, so all the stuff that we believe over this side that's true, how about that? And he won't say, because he doesn't want to alienate anybody. And this is why his heterodox academy is so useless. Sorry to say it, but it is, because it's just a bunch of left-wingers not taking responsibility for the fact that they did this and trying desperately to walk this fine line that doesn't exist anymore. It's like, pick a camp. And if you pick a camp, if you pick the side of, of objective reality and beauty and truth and righteousness, you've got to say what's actually wrong. And this is why I realized that just fighting for free speech in the abstract is something I've been very happy to hand off to the rest of the conservative movement. They seem to decide, they have decided that I came up with a good one, because that's what that's all they want to talk about now, and all they will probably want to talk about for the next 10 years. And yes, it's true that it's one of the left's biggest weak points. But if you actually want to fix the culture, and if you really want to save Western civilization, the only way to do that is to know about and defend and return to the importance of not religion, but Christianity.
I've noticed a trend of people from the left having, getting religion, as we say. I don't mean literally. People like David Rubin, who you mentioned, and Jonathan Haidt to a certain degree. And there are people who are part of Jordan Peterson's tribe that are kind of getting red-pilled. At least you could say they're getting slivers of the truth. The shafts of light are somehow entering, even if they don't know that you can't get rid of a problem without pushing it out with something else. Now, that something else is the grace of God and the truth of the faith. They just don't know that part of it.
Right, and they're just it's like St. Peter's Basilica at dawn. Just when the first shaft of light comes down at a very shallow angle, and you're just like, there's something amazing in here I can't see yet. And these people may never see it, but what's happening, I think, is that these people are realizing that this free speech thing, they're like, okay, we won. Everyone reasonable agrees with us now. And now what? We're just alone on this windswept mountaintop, and we've got our freedom of speech, and we can use any language we want. We can say whatever we want. What do we do with it? And they have no idea what to do with the power they've been clamoring for. Yep. And that's because they don't actually have any values, because fighting for free speech is not in and of itself a value. It's a tactic. What you're doing is trying to wrest back the artillery that was taken from you. But what you do with that artillery depends on what country you want to invade and why. And they have no clue.
So,
and this is what I realized like 2 years ago, and I'm always happy. I get a lot of hate and attack and all the rest of it because I get so bored with things that I come up with immediately. As soon as I publish a book, I can't bear to speak about it because I'm always like 2 years off, and I'm happy to be that way. But you will see, I think, and you suggesting that it's already happening. I don't follow many of those people super closely, but because they don't have very much to say that interests me because I did it all 2 years ago. But if what you're saying is true, that doesn't surprise me, and it's something that I've thought about too, and something I've heard also from gay conservative friends who are saying to me, I don't know anything about religion, but I don't understand why I'm being drawn to this, and I'm hearing you talk about it, and I'm thinking, is this what I'm missing? Is this what I'm lacking in my life? I think it's what happens when you are, let's say you're a black guy who suddenly realizes that the Democrat Party is manipulative, evil, and has screwed over generations of your family, your entire community for decades. Yeah. From the KKK through the Clinton crime bill, they've always been the bad guys and whatever. And you say, well, okay, good. So I've shaken myself free of this awfully name. Why do they call it Blexit? Blaxit was way.
No, that's right.
Blaxit was so much better. They said Blaxit. Okay, fine. So we've shaken off this yoke, right? We've thrown the manacles to the side of the room. What do we do with our freedom now? And that terrifying realization, that's the moment when you either go really, really good or really, really bad. And none of these people have given any thought whatsoever to what happens after you realize that you don't have to vote with your skin color, or after you have acquired the free speech that you've been demanding. And none of them have a clue. And I think that you are indeed going to see over the next 5 to 10 years many of the people on the libertarian conservative right who don't yet realize that they're headed in this direction start to see them tentatively put out the feelers around religion and ask what's there, because there's got to be more than just laughing at snowflakes on campus. Once we've beaten them, once we've enabled ourselves to say whatever it is that we're bursting to say about race or gender or whatever, what comes after that? And that's the question that I'm thinking more about these days. And
it's one thing to realize what you're free from, in the case of blacks in the Democrat Party historically, and it's another thing altogether to know what you're free for. Freedom from is one thing, freedom for is another thing. And that requires an object, not just a strategy or a means. That requires a goal, a purpose, a telos.
Right. And the problem is that they instinctively and correctly, they've intuited that the left wants to tear down Western civilization, get rid of all the straight white males from the syllabuses, and they want to demean and ridicule the contributions of Europeans in whatever. But because they haven't been taught anything real of substance, they don't know, when they correctly intuit that the left's kind of tear down thing is wrong, when they scrub that away, they don't actually know what it is they've been defending all along, because they don't know anything about art or literature or philosophy or the church, most importantly, or history. I mean, you ask the college students, they're not taught it because their professors don't think it's useful or interesting or valuable or worthwhile. But you ask, I'm surrounded by college students in my inbox and at my talks and the rest of it, and you ask them, tell me, what's the most interesting thing for you about the French Revolution? And they're like, and these are 22, 23-year-old law students. You should know what it is. You should be able to tell me the 100-year stretch it occurred in, And I have some pretty big gaps in my historical knowledge, from a patchy education that I'm filling myself. But these people, they have no clue. They don't know anything about art. They've never been to a concert. I don't mean like a Drake. I mean, they've never been to see Mozart or Beethoven or Wagner or whatever. They've never read they've read very little in the way of decent fiction from before 1900. They don't know anything about history. They don't know anything about the history of philosophy or politics or how their system of government got to be the way it is. They don't know anything. So after, successfully kind of climbing the mountain, all they have left is like Republican buzzwords about small government and the Second Amendment. They have no idea why any of this stuff matters. No idea if they even agree with half of it. And there are perfectly respectable conservative, intellectual positions that don't particularly like the way that the United States is constructed, that don't treat the Constitution as this, as this wholly revered whatever. I mean, I happen to think constitutional monarchy is by far the best way to organize a country. And America's system is completely stupid, because you have a president who is also the prime minister, meaning that the occupant of that chair is going to be good at one or the other, as a man typically is, but never both at the same time.
Yes.
So the president the United States is either going to be a good administrative lead like Barack Obama or a good presidential figure like Trump. But the office of the president is called on to do both, which means that nobody can ever be successful in that job. It's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And so no, they don't know any of this stuff, and they can't talk about any of it because they just want to, they just want to talk about these silly, buzzwords they've inherited from Fox News talking heads, and that is what is so sad.
Certainly, the sloganeering and the shallow thinking and the ignorance is ample on both sides of the political aisle. I've interviewed the author of a book you had something to do with called Catholic Republic, Why America Will Perish Without Rome. Timothy Gordon, a great book, very provocative thesis that America was founded and its structure's DNA is Catholic and it functions as Protestant and it's perceived as a secular. How many natural law thinkers that went into the writing of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, were raiding the Catholic pantry, Thomas Aquinas and Augustine and Aristotle and so on. So I just want to get that plug in. I'm going to put the link to that at patrickcoffin.net. Media.
I mean, Tim Gordon's book is, you could roll that thesis out to pretty much all of Western civilization and all of its, concomitant, streams and all the rest of it. I enjoyed that book a lot. I was happy to publish it because in a sense it doesn't go far enough because but of course the Catholic basis of Western civilization is a bit big for anyone. Right. But yeah, no, I mean it's perfectly true in a way that and people don't even know really how to interrogate that statement or how to really understand what that means because there's been a sort of systematic expulsion over the past 30 or 40 years in American higher education of anything that might constitute, a grounding in Western civilization, specifically Western civilization.
Let's turn to Diabolical and the book and the subtitle, which we'll dig into. In a few passages of the book, Milo, you seem to suggest that the church might actually fail. It might fall apart or it might cease to exist. Is that hyperbole, like a good spiritual Jew, or do you believe that somehow the church has an expiration date that it might meet?
Jewish, so maybe I do that from time to time. I think that it's obviously we are headed toward an unprecedented situation for the Catholic Church. Catholic Church, which has survived all these apocalypses previously, whether it's Darwin or Voltaire or whatever.
Muslim hordes.
Right. This one, it might not, because this is the first time, I think, that ordinary church-going Catholics are not just upset. They don't just feel betrayed. They feel contemptuous of their spiritual leadership. And I don't know if this has quite been the case at quite the scale ever before, in a sense that could be existential for the church in Western countries, certainly anyway. I mean, I think Africa is the only place where the Catholic Church doesn't have to worry too much. But of course, those African bishops who are very doctrinally conservative don't hold much power in the Vatican because it's all aging, trendy lefties.
Yet, I'm praying to the baby Jesus that we get an all-black curia and a black pope. I could live with that.
Hell yeah. I'd love that. And you just imagine, not least because of the frothing, fulminating fury of the progressive left, who have like a really conservative black Nigeria, like the Nigerian guy, as Bishop of Rome. The prospect is delicious and surely must happen within our lifetimes. I do think there's a serious risk of the church effectively fracturing. I think it could split in two. Right.
Well, it definitely could split in two. It happened.
I don't think it's going to evaporate. It's the Catholic Church, for goodness sake. But
yeah.
Could it split in two? Yeah. I think if you look at the way the Anglican Communion is and all of the horrors of that, there's no appetite for that among, at least half of Catholics. They don't want to get into that. So they'll go and do their own thing. And then there'll be some kind of leftover left-wing Protestant light or Protestant-esque lefty eternally drifting to the progressive, permissive, sexual, moral kind of wing of the Catholic Church, which will just become like another branch of Anglicanism, I think, with the same horrors and compromises and with the same cratering attendance. I wouldn't want to see that, but I think it's fairly obvious which of the Catholic churches I would join. I'd be off to Africa. But I think there's a really good chance. And much will depend on what happens with Francis, who has been, by I think every metric, by far the worst pope when it comes to defending, turning a blind eye to and and dragging his feet on dealing with child abuse and the people who cover up for abusive bishops. John Paul II is widely regarded as having been willfully blind. He'd been told over the table, specifically by his cardinals, you've got to do something about this. This is building to a head of steam. And he had just sort of pretended that he hadn't heard it. Benedict, of course, great theologian and a beautiful man, but had no organizational chops, or it wasn't a leader in the sense.
And didn't want the gig.
No, he didn't, and he didn't want to he didn't have the constitution. He's not a Cardinal Pell. He doesn't have the constitution to crack down on a corrupt branch of the church or the whole thing. He just wanted to write books and be and think and speak about God.
And which he did. 3 large tomes when he was sitting on the chair of Peter, the Jesus of Nazareth books. Yeah.
He did, and then he gave things like the Regensburg Lecture and all the rest of it. And this is who we really needed from him. And I don't, maybe he wasn't well suited to being Pope, and he certainly didn't want to deal with the bank. He didn't want to deal with child abuse, and so he left. But Francis, on the other hand, is Clintonian. He is well suited, at least to maintaining and wielding power, even if he's not well suited to being a Catholic Pope. And if the risk is this guy who has rehabilitated close friends because they are politically in line with him, because they are loyal to him, because they're useful fundraisers, despite the fact that they're accused of fiddling with boys as young as 11. The fact that he's put them back in circulation and put them back specifically in seminaries, re-gifted them access to young trainee priests, is unforgivable. It's unforgivable. And the problem for us is, you can't depose a pope. No, there's no appetite for that among traditionalists because we don't do stuff like that. We don't really want him to resign, because if you set a precedent that, 2 popes have resigned in a row, which hadn't happened previously for 500 years or something. Yeah. Then the presumption is that popes are going to retire in office, which means that the whole thing becomes a political appointment.
That's right. And then it's subject to political lobbying and pressure to quit. Yeah.
Right. Then you get opposition research and political parties within the College of Cardinals, which is the last thing we want.
Right.
So what do? You just wait for do you turn the Vatican into the kind of place that Bob Woodward says the Trump White House is, where you've got a guy issuing instructions and his underlings are kind of deciding whether to follow them or not? Doesn't seem very healthy. Yeah. What's the answer? This is why the last chapter of my book, which is not an invocation to violence, but rather just a reference to a Robbie Coltrane movie. The last chapter of my book is called Why the Pope Must Die.
Yeah, you have to have seen the movie. It's like, what? Yeah, it's a comedy.
It's called The Pope Must Die, the chapter and the movie. Steady on, calm down. What I specifically and only mean is he's got to die, like all popes do in office, so we can get somebody new, because that seems to be the only way out of this situation.
Milo, I've interviewed the top authors who've come out with critical books in the last year, from Philip Lawler, Lost Shepherd. He has a new book called The Smoke of Satan, which is a very, very balanced, accurate account of what's going on. What's that?
The Smoke of Satan, which is a very balanced title.
Yeah, my interview is called "Is Satan Smoking in Church?" I interviewed Marc Antonio Colonna, the real name being Henry Cyr, who wrote The Dictator Pope. Yes, and so I've never felt so dizzy as a serious Catholic, a bad Catholic. I mean, I laud the medicine I don't take regularly enough, but the difference between
Catholic, you'd be Anglican.
Well, we could go on. By the way, I want to bring up Evelyn Waugh before we end at some point. The difference between bad popes in the past, whether they're the Borgia popes or the Medici era, with popes having murderous hits taken out and mistresses and so on, open corruption. Mm-hmm. This pope seems comfortable generating weaponized ambiguity. That's the difference.
Yes.
And
yes,
I will not say one word about the Vigano allegations. Well, why not say Vigano is a lying fool and here's why?
Yeah.
Just silence is not really a leadership policy.
It's not working anymore. And it's also this is why I call him Clintonian, because he's sort of terrifyingly slippery in that way. He'll refuse to comment, as he did when the Vigano letter first came out. He refused to comment to journalists who asked him about it. But then over the space of 2 weeks or 3 weeks afterwards, in about 4 or 5 different homilies, he starts talking about accusers and equating them with Satan, with the great deceiver, the great accuser. He called Satan the great accuser. And he's talking about bishops being the victims, saying that, the vicars of Christ are under assault from the great accuser.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? And then you read these books by the two guys you mentioned and others besides, and you find out that as Jorge Bergoglio, he was in Buenos Aires, on the one hand saying, this stuff hasn't happened to me, meaning scandal about child abuse, interesting choice of pronoun, because he, of course, would be the victim if there had been children molested in the Archdiocese of Buenos Aires or whatever.
Yeah.
Of course, it's you that's the victim there. At the same time as telling journalists this never happened to me, he was simultaneously commissioning a report that poured cold water on allegations, accusing abused, well, now adults, but formerly abused children of exercising their feverish sexual fantasies on priests, of constructing stories and victimizing. So this is, as I say, properly Clintonian, to be giving quotes to the press saying, "Oh, this is never a problem for me." At the same time, commissioning a report to try to discredit this is Hillary going after Bill's victims. That's how bad it, and then presenting herself as a feminist in a presidential election. That's how bad this stuff is. Mm-hmm. And the dictator pope that Henry Cyr put together. It shows you who he is, and some of the stuff he got up to in Buenos Aires, and suggests very delicately, in the manner of a well-educated Englishman, that this might be a characteristic of the Latin American church, and indeed that he was raised under Perón and has picked up a few things.
Peronism in practice as a political strategy, which and people have to understand this. Peronism is neither left nor right; it's just Machiavellian.
The naked pursuit of power, i.e., Clintonism, which is what.
Do you think, Milo? Do you think all this explains why, unlike Benedict, who went back to Germany several times as Pope, and John Paul II went back to Poland, Pope Francis has been to South America twice, possibly 3 times in the last 6 years, never to his country of birth?
I don't think sometimes people conjure stuff like that up to try to insinuate something. I think in this case they're right. There must be a reason. If you have an opportunity to gift your home country something extraordinary, which is a close connection, like a spiritual, or even just a vague feeling, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Connection to the papacy, and therefore to the church, therefore to God. You can offer your flock something that nobody else can, which is somebody in the papacy, somebody in the throne of St. Peter, who looks and sounds like they do. That's very powerful as a tool of evangelization, as a tool of of shepherding. But he doesn't. Why doesn't he? Probably because he's no more welcome in Buenos Aires than whatever. I mean, it's a strange country. It is strange. The sorts of people that they, after the Second World War, decided to welcome in. It is a weird place. But yeah, I think people are onto something there. There might be a reason, maybe because they're the people who know him best. What do you do when you don't want the bad stories to come out? You don't poke the hornet's nest. You don't go back and antagonize the people who know where all the bodies are buried.
That's right. There's certainly been a shift. As a metric, when Der Spiegel, the German left-wing publication, turns on you. Did you see the cover story? Thou shalt not lie. Just really astounding.
It's big. Everything sounds so much more sinister in German. It's this black and white picture of him with "Thou shalt not lie," and it's like Der Spiegel hated Benedict. They hated him, and they loved this guy because he said the right thing about Muslims. But these pathetic attention-grabbing stunts, like washing the feet of a Muslim immigrant and saying we all worship the same God. We don't. It would be lovely if some senior Catholic priest at some point, once in the next 50 years, would admit that obvious truth. These sort of silly pandering stunts, these are the kind of things that win over left-wing journalists. All Pope Francis has to do is subtly and derisively mention walls, and the whole left-wing press corps, practically soil themselves, falling over themselves to write up joyously, the Pope's bashed Trump too. That's the Pope. What you got to say about that, conservatives?
It was dog whistling. I mean, actually, it wasn't even dog whistling. It was audible. He didn't say anything about the Hillary Clinton campaign, but lots of kind of sideways comments indicating it's not even passive aggressive, just sort of a sly sideways way. Which
he's intervening in politics to support his own interests, which are having politicians in power that are like him. Of course, he wanted Hillary in power because she's someone he could work with.
Right. Let's talk about Islam for a minute. I've interviewed Robert Spencer and William Kilpatrick. I'm not sure if you know Kirk Kilpatrick stuff. He's just doing so much yeoman's work on the threat of militant Islam, and not just militant Islam, but it's the claims and the commandments of the Quran and the Hadith.
Right. Well, Robert
which Spencer sort of he just keeps pounding that. Do you agree, Milo, that people can be forgiven to a certain degree in their ignorance of Islam and the claims and the differences between us and them? Because there's, as Kilpatrick points out, there's more information on the back of a extra strength Tylenol bottle than there is in the Catechism of the Catholic Church on what Islam is. So there's an incredible dearth of catechetical information by Catholic authorities. We're very, very hep to do Muslim-Christian dialogue. And how's that worked out?
I think that you could be forgiven for being ignorant of Islam prior to 9/11. I don't think you have any excuse after that, regardless of whether your Catholic authorities are talking about it or not. I don't think you've been able to trust your Catholic authorities to tell you the truth about very much for a long time. I don't think you can throw your hands up and say, well, I don't know about Islam because my priest doesn't tell me anything. Get a grip. Go out. After 9/11, there's no excuse. There's also no excuse, by the way, for pronouncing it Islam in the way that they want you to. You're sliding into the BBC pronunciation. You can practically, when you hear like some guy. Sorry, I'm teasing you, but this is true, and you should stop it. You'll hear some like BBC guy from Wigan or Barnsley or something, and he'll be like, narrating a documentary number 557 that year about Muhammad on BBC Two, and he'll be like, blah 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 Muhammad, and you're like, where did that come from? Because
that's fair enough. I don't have the phlegm supply or peace be upon him, Muhammad.
Yeah. No, you could practically hear them under their breath saying "peace be upon him." No, Islam is the and that's not even how you say it in Arabic. Muslims always laugh at like white people trying to like pronounce it sensitively and reach out over so like, oh, I'll just say it the way that I've heard it on the BBC, when just to be respectful. It's not respectful.
How do you pronounce it?
It's an evil political death cult. Snap out of it. I don't go out of my way to sort of to pronounce the whatever. Anyway, it's just.
So how do you pronounce it?
Islam and
Islam.
But when you're really into religious subjects, you tend to listen to. I'm sorry, I'm roasting you, but this is not really directed at you because
I wasn't even aware of how I was pronouncing it. I wasn't trying to pander. I'm just an ignoramus.
I knew that you would want to know. You see, everybody does this. Conservatives and liberals alike. They'll listen to, because of course the only people who you hear talking about Islam in the media are sympathetic to it, mollycoddling it, pandering to it. So they'll say, they're all religious studies graduates or whatever who really love Islam because Muslims hate the West as much as they do, and they'll talk about Muhammad and Islam, like Islam with the soft. It's Islam. It's Islam. Yeah. It's a z. Because Islam is like this kind of like mock Arabic pronunciation that people do to pander to Muslims. No, thank you. And
I wonder if that's why Gavin McInnes pronounced it Islam.
Yeah, no, that's exactly why he does, to deliberately pronounce it wrong, because everybody else in media has this sort of like obsequious, like, toe-curling mock Arabic pronunciation. You hear like newsreaders say Muslims, and you're like, you've picked that up from Muslims because it's the Middle Eastern pronunciation. They're Muslims. I liked the good old days of Muslims. But anyway,
what happened to Muslims? That was de rigueur. There's another example of our cultural betters deciding how people are going to speak and how they're going to pronounce it.
Don't you see? I mean, I'm sorry again. I didn't mean to tease you in particular, but this is a subject of perennial interest to me. Mm-hmm. How you'll see even on Fox News, and this is how things happen, and you see the kind of like the built-in obsequiousness and you meet them over halfway, like popes being. And John Paul II did this too. Popes being photographed kissing the Quran, for instance.
Well, that was a mistake.
Has any Muslim leader ever kissed a Bible on camera? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. And yet all of our newsreaders are saying Islam and Muhammad and Muslims. Like, get a grip. No.
I don't disagree at all, Milo. Anyway. It's like white bread TV hosts or anchors from Kansas that will say things like, today there was a political coup in Nicaragua. All of a sudden there.
Yeah. I love that, Nicaragua. It's so funny because they don't so desperately want to be seen as culturally sensitive. Well, I'm culturally sensitive. I'm sensitive to my culture being ripped apart by some alien totalitarian hellscape, regime from the Middle East, and I'm very culturally sensitive. So I have a finely tuned ear for people who should know better, pronouncing things in it is like sort of use sort of like use the language of the beast. No, I think there was to answer your question. Sorry, I got off on a tangent. But to answer your question, there was an excuse before 9/11, but I think now everyone has access to enough material about Islam to be educated about it. Robert Spencer, you mentioned, of course, is a friend, and he has achieved the remarkable feat of writing, like 90 books on Islam, and none of them is the same book rewritten, which is normally the problem with people who are that prolific. All of his books are different. Of course, a lot of the material is remixed in new ways, but all of his books are completely different.
That's true.
And it's a very rare accomplishment. So in the corpus of Robert Spencer work, you can find something that is pitched right for you and in a way that will appeal to you, because he's got these very approachable, was it Confessions of an Islamophobe, for instance, which is very easy to read.
He was on my show talking about that. Yeah.
Right, and then the much more scholarly stuff. So no, I don't think there is any excuse not to know things that you ought to when these people are flying planes into your buildings. No, I don't think there's any excuse.
A point you make in the book has to do with Mr. Khan, the Muslim mayor of London.
The what mayor?
I forget his first name. Who's Khan?
No. What did you say? The what mayor? What kind of mayor is he?
The Muslim mayor of London. I forget how I said it.
You said Muslim.
So don't turn the show. Don't you take the controls of the show, Milo. I'll just pretend to have technical problems, okay? Muslim.
And then okay. Questions in Arabic.
I hope you give Spencer a hard time because he pronounces it Muslim, okay? Just FYI.
And I told him when he was, you are currently speaking to me in my kitchen, believe it or not. This is where, and right over there on that bench, I told him the same thing I just told you. So you're in very good company.
Well, alt-right white supremacists always lie because it's in their holy book. So whatever. But let me get to my question about multiculturalism. I was raised in Canada. And in Canada, there's a delight taken in the fact that we have a cultural mosaic. It's like a homemade patchwork of identities cobbled together by what? I'm not sure. It's almost like when people say diversity is our strength, I don't understand why differentness is a strength. It's almost the opposite of the American melting pot. But you make the point in Diabolical.
It's called a salad bowl.
Okay, very nice.
And that's for a salad bowl because in a it's different from the melting pot. The melting pot, things get cooked together like a casserole to create a dish that is greater than the sum of its parts, and that's the promised goal of multiculturalism. But what we actually have in the West is not a melting pot; it's a salad bowl where everything gets mixed together, but all the ingredients stay distinct, and some of them don't go with one another.
Like French and English, but I digress. But you posit multiculturalism as a strategy, as a kind of collective guilt, a kind of appeasement to self-punish for colonialism.
Yes, which is, of course, stupid because the Christians were the good guys, and aren't we glad they won? And to the extent there's been colonialism, what that means is we've spread wealth, prosperousness, art, literature, culture. The places that are former British colonies are infinitely the better for it, without exception. And there, you could say that Africa's in a mess. Africa, frankly, would be in a mess regardless. And it's not just Britain who's been in Africa. Now it's the Chinese today. Africa has been treated badly by everybody. But look at India. Look at Canada. Look at America. The Japanese speak our language and wear our suits, to conduct their business. Australia, which would be a continent full of, would have 700,000, tribesmen who don't even have the written word and still don't. And now there's Australia, these are the products of Western civilization. And if you're intent on, genuflecting on bowing at the altar of political correctness, apologizing for spreading freedom, democracy, capitalism, Shakespeare, and Beethoven across the world, I think you have a problem. And what I said with Sadiq Khan, the Muslim mayor of London, was his argument when he said, which scandalized a lot of conservatives, and I understand why it did. He said that terrorist attacks were like part and parcel of living in a big multicultural city, right? And what he seemed to be saying, if I understood, I don't think he was defending the attackers. I hope he wasn't, although he is a mayor who is happy to attend segregated rallies in Muslim areas, which I think is pretty disgusting. But what he seemed to be saying was multiculturalism is a great goal, and this is the cost of it, because it's messy and imperfect, and this is the cost that comes with it. But look at all the stuff we get. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that analysis, but I do agree with that reasoning. Now, I don't agree with multiculturalism for its own sake. I think it leads to grotesqueries. I don't think that the terrorism that we've seen in the West has made it worth it. I don't think that we have much to show for diversity and multiculturalism. We have a lot of racial tension, all the rest of it, mostly thanks to the left's agitation, but whatever. I don't think that this prize of multiculturalism has delivered on its promises, and I don't think it's worth all the compromises and horrors that it's produced. But the reasoning, which is what I say in the book, which gets some people a bit upset until they read it. Until they've read it once or twice and understand what I'm saying. The reasoning is sound. And that reasoning I apply to the church and say, look, the Catholic Church is messy and complicated, and it is a vast thing that is worth the trouble. And some of the things that we have been experiencing, some of them have been the cost of having a church. For instance, some of the problems with the clergy are the cost of having an all-male clergy. That doesn't mean that having an all-male clergy is wrong and that we should tear it up and that we should turn into Methodists, which is just, for women and homos. What it means is we should have male clergy, but we should enforce the rules more strictly. We should remember why it is that we have them in the first place. Try to, get rid of the homosexuals, or at least get rid of the practice, get rid of the sodomy from the clergy. It's not supposed to be fun. The priesthood is supposed to take something from you. You're supposed to give something up. It's not supposed to be easy. Forsaking being a father is not supposed to be fun or easy. It's not a prize to be gained. And the problem the Anglican Church has had is it presented the priesthood as a sort of prize. Women wanted it too because it was presented as something desirable. I don't find the prospect of joining the priesthood particularly desirable, nor should anyone. It's something that you undertake out of a feeling of spiritual compulsion. It should be hard, and so the stuff that has happened doesn't mean we should throw out the idea of male clergy. Clearly, we don't want women in the priesthood. So
it's still, I understand entirely. It's, in other words, some great things are worth it, even if they come with imperfections. One example out here in California was the so-called controversial canonization by Pope Francis of Saint Junipero Serra, who basically invented California, named most of the cities, produced the spine of new.
He did talk, right, with the scorpions and stuff.
He's just a phenomenal, a total mensch. But the Spanish missionaries did have political things that didn't jibe. There were mistakes made, is what I'm saying, but it's still worth it, which is an important caveat.
Mistakes were made. You're absolutely right. And so Sadiq Khan's reasoning, I think, is sound, although his examples are wrong because I don't like whatever. But that's the point of the book, really, is that how can we, knowing what we know, and we've touched on it in this conversation briefly, how much the Catholic Church, how much our faith has given us in culture, in everything in the West, how can we, despite the admittedly horrible present situation the church finds itself in, even contemplate throwing it out or allowing it to split down the middle, or or endanger or endangering the papacy? We can't do any of those things, because when you set even the horrors that we're currently learning about, when you set that against what what Catholicism has done, for Western civilization, which is to say it is Western civilization, how can you throw all of that away for a scandal which is horrendous but doesn't scratch the surface of what the church has accomplished?
Yep, I always say the height of folly to leave Jesus and Peter because of Judas.
Exactly.
Milo, let me go to chapter 2 briefly, because I also want to, if we have time, talk about this Chestertonian idea of laughter and war, which I love. 2 places I like to go. They're both giant neon elephants in the pantry, the parlor. Maybe the pantry because you're in your kitchen. So let me hit the first one. I know you go through life being misquoted. I know the feeling. People take a snippet of something you said, or they'll show 4 seconds of video, and they'll say, look, and they construct a whole worldview about you based on a lie or about a half-truth.
Yes.
I took the time to, it's brief, it's only a couple of sentences.
I've read the whole book, and I still hate it.
Right. Okay. Well, so Joe Rogan in 2015 and Drunken Peasants in 2016. I know you're wincing. It was wincing to read, I'm sure. No doubt. Here's what you said, and I'll give you a chance to set the record straight. You said, no, I was not a kid at the time. This is Father Michael now, when you were 14. Yeah. And this goes to the subtitle of your book, You as a Sexual Abuse Victim. Yes. You said, I was a sexually aware, a promiscuous 13 or 14-year-old, perfectly able to give consent. One of the drunken peasants, whom I will not name, said, how does everyone feel about the age of 13? And you say, for some, it was perfectly fine. The difference here is that I gave informed consent. You're advocating for cross-generational relationships here. Can you be honest with that? And you said, yeah, I don't mind. I think admitting that, I think particularly in the gay world and outside the Catholic Church, if that's where some of you want to go with this, in the gay world, some of the most important, enriching, and incredibly life-affirming, important, shaping relationships, very often between younger boys and older men, can be hugely positive experiences. And then you said you felt a bit aggrieved at how you had to stand up in front of the world's media, stream live on CNN and Fox News, and tell the whole planet that you'd been sexually assaulted as a young man. This is the one question people most wanted me to ask you. How does the narrative that you told then square with what you're telling now in the book? Because they seem contradictory.
So they do. What I said was that I wouldn't phrase it that way twice, to put it mildly. It is incontrovertibly true that there is a long history of older gay men and young gay teens who are in mutually consenting partnerships within which there is often a sexual element, where that younger man can, as it were, be welcomed into lifestyle in a safe way rather than going out and getting, raped in an alley or in a park or something, particularly when they live in an environment or have parents who are just, they're not able to talk about that kind of stuff with at all. The one apology I gave in that press conference was specifically for the passage you mentioned, where I said, I stepped outside of what I believe and used way too many intensifiers. This is on some kind of 4-hour late night alcohol fueled live stream, and I would never phrase it that way again. And that went way, way, way further than the judicious phrasing that I just used with you. That is what I believe. That is an incontrovertible fact. And if you look at even left-wing gays went silent after that press conference. They weren't criticizing me on Twitter because they knew it was true. As far as the age of consent thing goes, what's never quoted in that same, just after the passage you read, what's never quoted is I say that the age of consent, I think, is about right, meaning 16 in most European countries, a mixture over in America. The age of consent is about right. So that's the bit that's never quoted. Yeah. What I did say about my own experiences is that my own perception of myself at the time is that I was able to give consent at 13, 14, which I believe. Now, you might think that's insane, but that was my experience of it. And honestly, the chapter you're talking about, there are people who've had their lives ripped apart by what happened to them at the same age as me. But there are also people who were more precocious, more sexually developed by that age, like me, who were perhaps damaged by it, as I think perhaps I was, but who survived it. And, for them, it wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to them. But because I was speaking strictly about my own experiences, I did take the time immediately after that, despite the drinks and the late night, whatever, to point out that I thought the age of consent was about right, because not everybody is me, and we need to protect predatory older men. And I certainly, when they said, the thing that I should not have said, when they said you're advocating for intergenerational relationships, what went through my head at the time was 20 and 40, which is very common in the gay world. And that's the world I was thinking about. Yeah. I certainly did not mean to suggest that a 12-year-old and a 32-year-old is an acceptable relationship, and I don't believe that, and I don't think that. And I've tried to make that as clear as I can in the years that have followed.
And so you 2 years hence after I mean, when you first process something like that, and you're being asked by someone like Joe Rogan, who repeatedly told you you're gay as F. I don't know how many times he said that. It really bothered me. He talked over you. He didn't let you finish sentences. He really had an agenda. He kept looking over to his producer. So I thought it was skewed against you. Father Michael, the priest who abused you, has since committed suicide, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I have a 14-year-old, and I can't imagine learning that someone would harm my child like that. So I'm gonna go to something else, but I want to linger on a question I got asked on my Facebook page by a guy who has had sex with hundreds and hundreds of men in his life. Former male model, the New York Castro District lifestyle for many, many years. Found Jesus Christ, found chastity, found peace. He's one of my, I'm a big fan of his. His name is Paul Darrow. He's featured in a documentary about his life and the life of two other ex-gays called Desire of the Everlasting Hills. Paul wrote this to me, to you. Having welcomed sexual attention from older men before I was 15 years old, I can easily identify with what Milo was describing in those interviews. It was only recently that I began to understand the damage that was done to me by that sexual abuse from years ago. Hopefully, Milo will recognize this time in his own life and learn that he doesn't need to be potty mouth and shock jock in order to be appreciated and taken seriously. And then he says, as a father, I would want to ask Milo if he would want a young teenage son of his to welcome sexual advances from an older priest in the way that he welcomed them when he was a boy.
Well, I now have an answer to that question that I didn't when I was speaking extemporaneously and casually over drinks on a late night YouTube live stream, not ever imagining that I would have to, and it's clear from the footage that I'm kind of being provocative and pushing it and trying to be funny in some places there, right? And also, obviously, all this is informed by my experience. I haven't asked that question now, which I didn't have then, which is I'm now in a relationship with a man who has a son, and his son is 16. And when I think about that 16-year-old 3 years later being on the receiving end of that kind of experience, it makes my blood boil. And it makes me want to it makes me realize that, and this is, I guess, is the only respect in which I'm glad that all this happened. It has made me realize that although I personally may not have been crippled by this, or at least was crippled in a way that I don't immediately perceive, so perhaps it doesn't provide me with that pain every day that some other victims feel, I'm maybe in the minority in that respect. And when I think, and probably 2 years ago, I didn't have any 14-year-old kids in my life. I was a 3-year-old gay journalist, who I didn't have anyone that age in my life. Now I am in a relationship and have a stepson of 3 years older than that, and have reflected and heard from a lot of other victims about how it affected them. I would never say those things again. And I would never phrase even the things that I must say are true about gay lifestyle and about gays. I would never phrase them that flippantly again. I would never use the intensifiers that I did before. I think I said hugely positive experiences. I would never use that phrase again. And I certainly would underscore the thing that is never quoted afterwards, where I say the age of consent is about right. I would bookend everything I say with that. I didn't realize at the time that, if you like, I'm like a pathologically non-victimizable and non-vulnerable person. And maybe this is partly because of what happened. I'm just like, nobody scares me. Nobody bothers me. You can throw whatever. I have been accused of white supremacy, and I have a black husband, and it almost made me, single for my whole life because I can never find anybody. I've been accused of the most appalling things, and it hasn't killed me. So it's like, I've almost defined myself by my indestructibility. Maybe it's partly as a result of what happened, but other people aren't like that.
My friend,
what I've realized is other people aren't like that. And it doesn't mean that I'm ever going to stop making jokes about things, because I'll make jokes about Father Michael as long as I choose to for the rest of my life. And those people who got upset about me saying, for instance, I made a joke about oral sex, that I repeat in a different form in the book. And I'll always make jokes about it. Anyone who thinks I can't make jokes about something, especially something that happened to me, can go hang.
Yeah,
but,
well, it's a way to defang the pain. Everyone knows that about it.
They know that, but they pretended they didn't in February 2017. But in answer to your question, the specific passage you wrote is the only bit of any of it where I do regret it, and that's why I did that press conference, because I'm not the kind of person to apologize ever otherwise. But when I was presented with it in the cold light of day, a year and a half afterwards, I was like, I don't believe that.
Right.
So sure.
There's a quote attributed variously to Steve Allen and Woody Allen. I'm not sure who it is, who actually said it, but it's a definition of comedy. Comedy is tragedy plus time.
Right.
There's a truth in there.
Yeah, well, my problem's always been I never leave enough time.
Yeah. There's you on September 12th telling World Trade Center jokes. I
probably did.
Well, let me read something you wrote, and then we'll get to the other 800-pound elephant. This is one of these. I think it should be a meme. It's very. I'm not blowing smoke up your kilt, Milo. But listen to this. You wrote this.
It wasn't a bad Scottish accent, actually.
Scrubbing. It's more Glasgow than Edinburgh. Scrubbing the effeminate, the weak, the dishonest, the disreputable, the duplicitous, and the malevolent from the church will make way for the restoration we really need. A restoration of manhood and strong Catholicism, a strong Catholicism that recognizes the equal but different contributions of men and women and embodies the best of both of them. Manliness is what the church is lacking. It's a willingness to expose yourself to enemy fire, whether it comes from critics on social media, gunfire on the battlefield, or the horrors of the Passion. Whether or not you wear a uniform, you can still be manly and courageous in defense of family, church, country, and civilization. That's a great paragraph. So the other 800-pound neon elephant is your marriage to a man in Hawaii. Isn't that a bit like a firefighter announcing his commitment to arson? Do you see the cognitive dissonance that people have?
I do. And the way that, look, my position on this is evolving and complicated and probably contradictory. I see that very much as I don't believe for a second that my marriage is valid in the eyes of God. Nor do I want the church to change her scripture or her practices to satisfy my egotistical desires. I'm also aware that there are things for which I'm going to have to atone and things for which I will be answerable later. Mm-hmm. But it is also my view that the best way for me to be a warrior is for me to have a bedrock of stability that I have not found elsewhere in my life in this way. Mm-hmm. I don't have any heterosexual sexual urges. I'm not going to be with a woman. I'm not going to be married. And I'm also not going to be happy and able to fight and be out there doing good things if I am celibate. I could never make it as a priest. So this is my compromise position. This is the best that I can do right now. And my marriage I consider to be a piece of paper that indicates, that I have, rather than being some promiscuous harlot, that I will at least try to get as close to, a sanctified marriage union with a woman that I possibly can. Luckily, we don't have to address the gay adoption question, which I don't think I would ever be comfortable with because he already has a son. It's as close as I can get to what a good life looks like, while not ruining myself as a soldier for Christ, if you like. And I'm aware that it's not good enough for a lot of people, and I know that. But I consider the marriage to be a symbol of deep and abiding fraternal love with that person, but also a practical consideration, so that I have somebody who can serve the functions of a wife in medical and legal and financial contexts. So what I don't consider it in any way is, if you like, I think of it as a civil partnership, and that's precisely what I would have got if we'd been in Britain. If we'd been in Britain, which is civil partnership, which is a sort of some of the benefits of marriage between two people of the same sex, but without the word marriage and without any of the religious or spiritual connotations. I consider my marriage to be a civil partnership, not a marriage in the eyes of God. I don't think of it like a marriage. I think of it like a civil partnership. And I know that is, even so, after all that, not going to be good enough for some people, but that's as far as I can get.
Well, it sounds like the only person whose opinion you care about is God himself, which is a very sane position to take.
Right. I'm not particularly worried about traditionalist Catholics who won't listen to me at all because I'm flagrant about my sexuality. I'm especially not interested in lefties who are like, how can you be Catholic and gay? Right. And all of because that's just theologically illiterate about human sexuality too, which I get into in the book. What I am more worried about is living, as Oprah would put it, my best life, and answering to one person eventually and every day, and on that account, I don't think I'm doing too badly, although I know there's a hell of a lot I have to answer for, and will be judged according to. But
take a number, Milo.
Right, sure, but as you mentioned, Evelyn Waugh, we're in this church because we know we're sinners. If we thought we were good people, we'd be Protestants.
And imagine how worse we'd be if we weren't Catholics.
Yes, and another Evelyn Waugh, yes.
You rightly point out that in the church's taxonomy of sins of pride are higher on the severity scale than sins of the flesh. Now, this
sins
is not,
of the flesh are very low down for a reason.
But there's a but, though. There's a caveat, and that is that sodomy is not just a sin of the flesh. Sodomy is actually worse psychically and physically than fornication. If you're lusting after a college chick or having sex as a high schooler, or you're sleeping with a secretary and you're married, that's not against nature. Can you envision a life of chastity even though you have this partnership with John? Because
right now,
you're one confession away from Lord Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. I know you know that.
Right now, no. But if my relationship with him were ever to come to an end, I think I would enroll at a seminary immediately, because the answer is no, and it's not going to be good enough for some people. But I think I was headed in a direction perhaps of chastity anyway, and I was thinking about the priesthood for a number of years, not seriously because I don't think they'd ever have me, but
it actually makes sense, Milo.
this person has opened up a part of me that makes me a better Christian. And it's a very complicated thing to try to wrap your head around when you know that there are these ironclad, watertight prescriptions on the one hand, and the evidence of your soul and your senses on the other. And I don't mind admitting I have no answer to that yet.
Well, that's an honest answer. And thank you for letting me go there. For the first time this summer, I read Brideshead Revisited. I saw the...
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah. Evelyn Waugh writes with this sort of very atmospheric, descriptive, it's very sturdy. I very much enjoyed it. I remember watching the Jeremy Irons, I guess the UK, was it a miniseries? Which is also very well, rather faithful to the book. I was expecting this, this gay fest. It's not. It's very subtle in the three male. First of all, for people who think it's some gay romance drama, it isn't. It's really a study of how divine grace acts on a group of people, and the Catholics the Catholics through whom that grace works on the others are the jerks of the story. They're annoying, they're unattractive, they're obnoxious. I'm thinking of Bridie, right? Like all the serious Catholics, Marchmain's wife, the long-suffering wife who was abandoned, she's not very nice, but it's not about being nice. It's about being open. So
that's partly what my book's about. We've got, there's this cult of niceness, this all-consuming feeling that we have to reassure one another that we're great people and that sermons should be about how you're perfect and you don't need to change. Yeah, we do. We all need to change a lot. And that toughness, that resilience, and that the priesthood no longer demands anything of people who join it, but our churches no longer demand anything of their congregations. And that toughness of the Catholics in that book and elsewhere, this is what the church has lost. This is precisely what we need more of. So I never read that with hostility. I always read that, if anything, with a sort of wistfulness, about like how the church maybe once was, that I am too young to remember it. I'm too young to remember. I am too young at 34 years old ever to remember walking into a Catholic church and feeling like something was demanded of me, that I was being challenged to deliver something. I've had to find that out for myself, away from the church and independent of priests, and that is the greatest indictment that I can give of the Catholic Church. And it's also the experience that Rod Dreher has had. It's also the experience that a lot of other prominent Catholics have had. Joining the Catholic Church thinking, oh, scary, fire, brimstone, you're going to hell. And actually what happens when you walk in is you get a lecture about climate change and how everybody's perfect and special and you're good enough. And that's not what people come to the church for. That's not what they want out of the church. And I certainly have, although it has created complexities and challenges for me, certainly improved as a human being presented with the stark challenge of how I know I should live and how I do.
What was the line you said in another interview? Catholicism doesn't offer a hug, but the cross, something like that. The
enduring image of I can't remember exactly. I think it was an interview with American magazine. They never published because they were weenies. So I did the.
No, that's not true. I have to object. They are not. They are American Jesuits. They are not weenies. They're very bold and courageous. They want to hear all sides of the story. How dare you?
No, they don't. Because when the side of the story goes too far, they don't publish the interview, as they didn't with mine. This is the home of James Martin. Give me a break. No, I'm sorry. American magazine is an example of everything that's wrong with American Catholicism.
Just take my tongue and take it out of cheek. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's just bleh. No, it's a terrible magazine, a terrible place. But I did the only revenge I could have on them for not publishing it was to give the interview to Catholic Militant instead, which is what I did.
Church Militant.
Was that
Church Militant?
Excuse me, Church Militant.
Yeah.
Church, sorry.
Yes.
So this is the best revenge I could think of. And they did run it. And I think that's the interview in which I say, the enduring image of the church or whatever, it's not a hug, but a man on a cross, bleeding to death, dying for all of us. This, the Christ on the cross is the image of Catholicism. And as Feuerbach has told us, what this tells us about the culture that surrounds us in the religion is that we most value love and self-sacrifice. And love and self-sacrifice are not required of us in the modern Catholic Church. Self-love and entitlement seem to be what we're encouraged to indulge ourselves in. And that is not what I go to church for.
And isn't that embedded in the music in which we're almost literally worshiping ourselves and the wonderfulness of me?
I really feel sad that I have to say how much better Anglican music is than ours. You think that the Parry, I was glad at the beginning of the last, not the last royal wedding, but the William and Kate, or you think of like the Miserere Mei, or the Agnus Dei, or whatever, any of these things. And these, it's like, wait, this is a tradition that has been we have moved very, very far from, because our music is now hippy-dippy, self-indulgent crap. And it's very difficult to find a church that plays good music now. I mean, the only one I know of is the Brompton Oratory in West London. I'm sure there are a couple in the States, but the churches who would, if they could, play good music tend not to have the resources because the bishops don't like them.
Or the writers are not Catholic, like my Baptist Latin-loving friend Morton Lauridsen. Give a listen to O Manu Mysterium if you want to cry within 10 seconds. It just grabs you by the lapel. Beautiful. It just evokes Palestrina and that whole thing, and all those traditional hymns. Pardon me?
This is why the ordinariate, the personal ordinariate, are now best churches, because they have all the Anglican music.
No, that's true. And I went to one here in Orange County. There's a place called the. Now I'm going to draw a blank on the name of it. It's a retreat center in the mountains inland from Orange, and they celebrate the Anglican Ordinariate Mass. And it's just the elegance and the elevation of the English language. It's just beautiful to listen to. And it's not wussy. It's not in the sort of limp-wristed poetic sense. It's very manly and tough.
Well, High Church is very robust. The proper Church of England High Church, like Royal Wedding High Church, is very robust. It's not woofy or whatever. Well, my grandmother would say woofy. It's not woofy. It is strong and powerful, and still contains that reverence for and appreciation of the heroic manly virtues that the Catholic Church is so completely lost.
Yeah, that came up in my interview recently with Lee Pottles, and with his book Sacrilege, a very brave book. Nobody believed him back in 2008. Now every single page is prophetic and accurate. And then his other book, The Church Impotent.
Yes.
Right, the feminization.
Well, they were both big sources for me. Here's a guy who's been telling us all for 20 years, and nobody's been listening.
Is the name Daniel Mattson familiar? Matson. Daniel.
Yes. I think maybe that I might quote him in the book. I think there's a reference. I'm privileged to call him.
He's a brother in Christ of mine. Why I don't call myself gay. How I reclaimed my sexual reality and found peace. I first found him in First Things magazine.
It's not this book, but I think I quote him in something.
Okay, sure. Do you ever feel, when you look at your life and how you've changed and how your ideas have grown, as everyone is a bit embarrassed at the things they believed at some point in the past, but back to Brideshead Revisited, do you ever feel like you're more like Sebastian Flight than Anthony Blanche, but you're looking at Charles Ryder and wondering, maybe?
I don't have that same level of kind of cringeworthy awkwardness about my past incarnations, although I have morphed an enormous amount, and I was a really dreadful person to be around in my 20s. Because I think that there's a good kind of chameleon and a bad kind of chameleon. There's this sort of Jordan Peterson who wears the same fusty Victoriana, but depending on who he's speaking to, seems to change his opinions and allegiances and style quite dramatically. And some of the things he comes out of his mouth are different depending on who he's speaking to, which I find unsettling. And then there's, the kind of chameleon who will wear different outfits and costumes and adopt different language, but the message is always the same. And the message for me has always been the same. I like the same composers that I did when I was 15. I read this, I like the same, Gothic novels are still my favorite novels. All my favorite books are still the same. The things that I believe are fundamentally the same. There have been shifting changes in emphases as I've matured, and I've realized that that certain components of the package are more important to me than others. But I've changed superficially a lot, but fundamentally not very much. So I don't have the same level of about my juvenilia, let's say, that a lot of other people do. And I think that's because I thought a lot and hard about what I believed and decided, and it hasn't really changed that much. It's evolved, it's developed. I mean, some things I've realized are not that important, but they're still right. I kind of think of my life as a succession of albums, as a pop artist, or books as an author. I had or like periods, like Picasso. I had 1995. I was.
There was the blue period.
Such and such Milo, and this I was such and such Milo, but they're all still Milo, and I say, and they've all been effective in different ways with different audiences. So I have never thought of myself in terms of relations between literary characters. I've always thought, in terms of myself and me. So I don't relate to that feeling that you're describing, although I know most people do.
Well, we're going to types, right? Blanche is a type. Sebastian Flight is a type, as a sort of either the gay man who completely went licentiate and no self-control, no filter, no control over appetites. And then there's the suffering, almost sort of martyr of Sebastian Flight. So, and of course, some of the gay clergy have, in my mind, sickly and pathologically taken on Saint Sebastian as a kind of patron, which is really icky to me, and a befoulment of him. Maybe we can close with
exactly, sweetie.
What's that?
It was like, how have you suffered exactly, sweetheart? You know?
Right. Last comment, I wanted to get your take on Oscar Wilde, who, not unlike you, did not want to be tagged as a mascot for the dandiest, Victorian era homosexual movement. He was very diffident about his own behavior, suffered terribly from what he did to his wife and his son, spent time in jail. And I want to get your take on something he famously wrote in one of his last poems. And this is a true deathbed convert to the Catholic faith.
Yes, he was.
A book by, I believe you know Joseph Pierce, who wrote a wonderful book called The Unmasking of Oscar Wilde. And it's about that conversion at the end of his life. He said, "It's only through a broken heart that the Lord Christ can enter in." Does that about get it right?
It's exactly what I described happening to me earlier in our conversation. As I realized the only person who ever really cared about me and that I cared about was slipping away with my grandmother, on her deathbed. And I think perhaps that made me emotionally available enough to receive love of other kinds and to give love of other kinds. I go a step further than Oscar Wilde. I don't just not want to be a gay mascot, but I actively detest them. And I'm quite happy to see them all burn. Happy to see them all burn, because they're all advocating for things that not only are going to make them observably, demonstrably, considerably more miserable, but they're also advocating for things that are just going to destroy the world.
This is the thing that people don't understand about you, Milo. And it comes out in the book Diabolical that we've been talking about, and that is, you seem to despise homosexuality. There's an animus. There's a sort of rage is not the right word, but there's an elan. There's a passion that you have when you write about it.
No, it's not. It's not homosexuality I hate, because you can
sodomy then.
Well, yeah, love the sinner and hate the sin. It's gays, and it's a particular kind of gay. I don't hate. No, it's not. It's not homosexuality. It's not even sodomy, because how could I? Although I kind of do. It's gays. No, I wish that my people were different, because I feel. You're talking earlier about Brideshead Revisited. It's not some gay romance. It's a particular kind of arch British high camp, which of course contains homosexual elements, tones, themes,
undercurrents,
right, but it is a lot more else besides, and that's where I think gays are at their best, is when they're, for instance, I talk in the book about this, in my experience of the Catholic Church, there's two different kinds of homosexuals in it. On the one hand, you've got the sort of elegant, well-educated, conservative gays, some in the priesthood and some outside of it, who very often are extraordinary form fans. They love the Tridentine stuff. They love all the bells and smells, as it were.
Lots of lace.
Yeah, they love the lace. They're sort of timid, well-educated, quite often sparkling company, and they tend to be sort of sexually awkward and uncertain.
And maybe even naive?
Yeah, for sure. I don't think they've ever probably had a successful or a truly enjoyable or rewarding sexual encounter in their whole lives, right?
Would you include people who are so inclined but who don't act on it, who are that naive that they've never had any sexual experience?
I don't know that I believe that many people are like that these days. I wish they were, because I wish the clergy was still holding itself to those standards. But I don't think I've ever met anybody who's. Of course I have. I know fathers who are, but in general, yes, you're right. There are some people like that, but I think there are more people who have instead had what Hannibal Lecter called tedious, sticky fumblings in the backs of cars. And never really knew that there was something more there. Yeah. But wondered if they were ever going to have it, or if it was for them. And so have a kind of timidity about their attitude to sex. And it's difficult for me to think of those people as predators, because I think that they're as confused and scared as the people that they sometimes interface with. Sometimes some of them are younger.
And this is not something that's traditionalist versus liberal, because there is a kind of traditionalist homosexual clergy, right?
Well, yeah. So many gay people in the church, as laity and clergy, are very traditionalist. And I make a few jokes in the book about what that might be. They prefer the back of a man's head anyway.
By the way, have you heard of? There's a nickname for them. Seminarian friends of mine have told me about this.
What is it?
The super traditionalist, uber pious homosexual seminarian. They're called the Daughters of Trent.
Love it.
Sorry you had to hear it. Sorry you had to hear that.
Now I have a name for my kind of Catholic. But then I find it, although they are predators, I find it difficult to think of them in the same breath as Harvey Weinstein, right? Because they're clearly not that kind of predator. They are engaging in inappropriate, forbidden relationships that they should be punished for engaging in. But they're not like rapacious, abusive.
They're not. They don't come in malevolent. I
don't believe so. Yeah. Although what they're doing is wrong. Then, on the other hand, there are the Weinsteins of the Catholic Church, and this is the Lavender Mafia. These are the left-wing reformers who want aggressive changes to liturgy, to church doctrine, who think that the church is wrong about stuff, who also seem to be the most sexually promiscuous and prodigious. Yeah. And they are terrifying and aggressive, and they're the ones who will burst into rooms in the middle of the night and force themselves on young seminarians. These are the Theodore McCarricks, right? The guys who are, sinister, twinkle-eye, avuncular, whatever by day, and by night they're like, let me do this or you won't proceed to the next stage of your training or whatever.
No means tie me up.
And these but this particular kind of predator often seems to be very well networked. They're always on their way to like a lunch with an important, influential bishop, or trying to angle their way onto a committee or whatever. These are like careerist
and often geniuses at fundraising.
Yeah, like McCarrick, because they're very charismatic, and this does seem to have a political dimension to it, at least in my experience of the church. I don't know everybody, but the people I've mentioned this to are like, well, I've never thought about it like that, but you're right. There's a different kind of predator, and it's the left-wing ones I'm worried about, because it's the left-wing ones not only who are the really aggressive abusers, and I'm pretty sure that for instance, the people who maybe didn't have their lives destroyed by their experiences like me probably had encounters with timid, older men unsure of themselves, like the first group I talked about, for whom, like there was with me and Father Michael, there was an element of avuncular stewardship. Like, we talk about opera and books and all the rest of it. There were other components to it, versus these aggressive McCarricks who just want to get off. Yeah. And they want to get off, and for them it's an exercise of power. And their whole lives are exercise of power, because they're also angling to be on committees, and they're trying to like suck up to the right people, and they're running the Vatican today. They've done a good job because now they're running the show. These people are more dangerous for me, and it seems to me that the people who are affected by and touched by them, literally and figuratively, are the people who are probably more scarred by their experiences, because they're the ones who are going to be on the receiving end of threats, intimidation, bullying, and violence, right? And probably more, not to be too gross, but probably more serious, penetrative, or whatever it is, like the other guys probably are more into just like, just kind of don't even know what they're doing themselves. It's the aggressive left-wing guys who probably leave the scars in every sense, So let's leave it at that. But
there's a lot of information, Milo. This is a family show. No, I'm kidding. No. You want to be descriptive without being anatomically and gross.
That's as far as we need to go with it. But I'm just saying, I think that they're the ones that really concern me, that I worry about. So there is a political dimension to this, and I think that a lot of the people that Pope Francis has been sticking up for, and the people who have been sticking up for the people he's been sticking up for, they fall into this second category. Mm-hmm. And I find it difficult to hate gays who are unsure of themselves or wrestling with themselves, or who, are saddled with this unfortunate sexuality, but who are fundamentally, it seems to me, decent people aside from that side of their lives. And so often in public life, instead, we're presented with these aggressive, immoral, power-hungry egomaniacs, like the gays of gay pride, like the gays in the media, like the gays of Hollywood, like the gays, in politics, and like the gays of the current Catholic hierarchy.
Okay.
So those are the gays I don't like.
technically not part of the upper echelons of the hierarchy, but you mentioned Father James Martin, the roving editor of America magazine. Why do you think he will not come out as homosexual?
You've got to warn me before you bring him up, because I need to have a bucket ready.
An ice bucket or a cocktail?
No,
what?
No, just a bucket for vomit.
So why doesn't he come out?
I don't know why he doesn't come out. I think that perhaps people like James Martin are always trying to keep everybody happy, and they end up keeping nobody happy. And so I think probably he dreads the loss of support, and he knows that there are people who will won't come for him until he does that. There are people,
that's right. Or that'll be a bridge too far. Someone from Rome will pull his plug, and he will not get the speaking circuit days are over because it's too much.
I think the moment he does that, I think he has then made himself like a justifiable target. Now he's really just sort of an irritant. He's like a bad smell hanging around the church, constantly agitating for the worst, most destructive impulses in the church. Aided and abetted, of course, by his home America magazine, which is an evil place. But I think that were he to come out quite as bluntly and I mean, let's not forget that lefties love to manipulate from within the rules, right? They love to smash the system while staying technically on the right side of the rules. This is why Twitter will have these rules about abuse and harassment, which are really supposed to catch conservative points of view.
Of course.
But he's acting technically within the rules. If he comes out as gay, he steps outside the rules. And these people prefer to win from within the system because it's the system they're trying to destroy. And if you can live brazenly as a homosexual without ever having to say so and destroy the institution you're trying to tear down in the process, why would you ever go through the horror of why would you ever imperil yourself? What gain is there to him to doing that? Because now he has deniability,
Yeah, plausible deniability. I think that's one of the premises of Bella Dodd's book about her infiltration. This is a very interesting thesis. Bella Dodd was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, wrote a book about her experiences in the 30s, brought back to Rome by her spiritual father, who's also mine, Bishop Fulton Sheen. I forget the name of the book, but homosexuals and communists, preferably both at the same time, were the plan to infiltrate seminaries and so on. And if that's true, they've done a pretty good. They've had a long game in mind.
And look, there's a section of this in the end of, I think, chapter 3 in the book about the church and communism. I mean, this social justice as a manifestation of communism in the social sphere has so completely taken over the church hierarchy. You've now got bishop-approved organizations in the U.S. giving money to Planned Parenthood, and some of that money comes from the laity. Some of that money comes from people who give in the collection plates, and the bishops' conferences are passing on this money to organizations that end up writing checks to Planned Parenthood. How the hell did this happen? Now, the relationship between communists and the Catholic Church is very well documented. Alinsky wrote in Rules for Radicals, which is the handbook for left-wingers. He brags in Rules for Radicals about his ability to infiltrate the Catholic Church in Chicago. Where did Obama do his?
That's where I was going. Yeah.
Where did Barack Obama do his community organizing? In a Alinsky-founded group under the aegis of Chicago Catholics, right? This is a long, well-documented history of this that nobody seems to know, and this, of course, goes through to the present day.
This is Saul for people who don't know, Saul Alinsky, the industrial. What is it called? The industrial. It's a I want to say IED. His organization that basically trains what we now call community organizers using these very specific strategies laid down in his main handbook is called Rules for Radicals, dedicated to. You know who he dedicated it to?
I don't know.
No one believes me. Lucifer.
Really?
Yep.
It's here somewhere. I'm going to check that because I don't remember that.
It may have been expunged from later editions because of people. It was just so outrageous it was taken out. But
I think I would know that if I'd read it in an original edition, because mine is just some reprint. Do you know what? I don't think I ever knew that. That doesn't surprise me. But of course he would. What was the? I wrote about it in the book. There's an organization that had to have Catholic added to its name. Oh, the CCD.
Yeah, the CCD. Yes, community. All these bishops' conferences churn out the most forgettable acronyms. I can't keep up.
this organization had to have Catholic added to its name because it was doing un-Catholic things for so long. People started wondering, is this really a thing of the church? So in true Marxist fashion, they just added Catholic to the name. All right, off you go.
Right.
Anyway, but I had no idea about that. He dedicated to Lucifer. Yeah, well, there we go.
Yeah, the first radical. Last question, Milo, and thank you for your patience. I know that you're like, sipping water from a fire hydrant, getting word out about the book and so on. And so thank you for also agreeing to sit down and do an interview, which it's difficult. Whenever I'm a guest, I'm always nervous because I can't control what's about to be asked next. But I wanted to ask you,
I never feel that. I never feel as though I cannot control what's about to happen.
Good. You're with the side of science on the question of born that way, despite the work of the Nobel Prize-winning scientist Lady Gaga. You do not believe that anyone is born that way. What's your take on that?
I think that the consensus on this issue currently among scientists appears to be that you can be born with a predisposition, which can assert itself based on environmental factors, based on your choices, based on a variety of other things. Born this way, for those who don't know, who have been hoodwinked by the gay lobby, is a piece of propaganda that originated in the 1980s. The reason that the gay lobby came up with born this way is that the religious right were saying this is an immoral lifestyle choice. If you choose to do these things, you are engaging in an immoral lifestyle. So the gay lobby wanted to say, well, how do we fight this? Because, I mean, they're right, aren't they? They're kind of right. So they said, well, what if being gay was like being black or a woman?
Yeah.
You can't go after somebody for being black or a woman, or if you want to be like a nice guy. So they came up with born this way, which at that time had no basis in genetic science whatsoever, no basis in anything. It was just invented in the 1980s as a way to make being mean to gays like being mean to blacks or women. In other words, something that right-thinking people just couldn't bring themselves to do.
Yeah.
It had no basis in science whatsoever. Now, it's tumbled down to us because the left has owned culture from that time until today. The latest consensus seems to be that some people are born with a predisposition, which could be genetic or epigenetic, depending on whether you believe in that kind of thing, or whether you think that that's far enough along yet. But there is in everyone, without exception, an element of control that you can exert over it. And it's in that control, I think, that the choice, the grace, the test from God exists. Now, I came to the seriousness about my Catholicism way too late to correct my development. And at this point, forgive the expression, I think I'm probably stuck in a rut. But
yeah, I don't believe that for a minute. Read the Confessions. There's nature, there's nurture, then there's the most powerful of all to transform someone, and that's grace. But go on. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I think the best. I don't think it's possible for me to be with a woman at this stage in my life. I think it would be possible for me to be celibate. I don't think it would be possible for me to be with a woman. And I don't think that many gay people who have just been gay, basically gay for like 15 years, by the age of 35 or 40, would be able to jump tracks like that. I don't think
that's completely true.
I only wish...
I'm not trying to simplify it or reduce it, but I agree.
Believe me, I wish gay conversion therapy worked, because if it did, I would have done it in my 20s. I would have done it in my early 30s, and I wouldn't be where I am now.
Don't knock it entirely. I know people for whom it did work.
As it happens, I'm very happy, so I wouldn't do it now. But
these things happen.
I would have done it before now if I thought it actually worked. I don't think it does. But anyway.
Well, a lot of this is timing too. Your openness to a certain idea or course of action is often dependent on the mode that you're living in now. Some people, you ever have this experience with a line from the Bible or some author that you've read 1,000 times, and one day it's like 2x4 to the head, and you're ready to hear it.
Of course. Often in my own books, when I go back on but no, seriously, yes, and particularly in that book. I do understand that, and never say never, and all the rest of it. I think the best that I could probably accomplish, as I currently feel like I could do, would be to be celibate. I can't imagine myself with a woman. I just can't.
Two words, Milo. Fair enough. Two other words that you use in the book. And maybe we can close on this, which I really love. It's from G.K. Chesterton. I believe maybe from Heretics, but I think he uses it elsewhere. And that's the concept of laughter and war. Why do those typify what you're about?
This is my personal motto, which is, as you say, stolen from Chesterton. In a passage, the whole passage is worth reading, actually. It's lovely. And I think what I realized annoyed people more than anything else about me was the fact that they couldn't get to me. They could never make me upset. Like, I don't care what anybody says about me, friend or foe. It just doesn't bother me. And I have ups and downs, professional, financial, reputational, whatever, but I'm always a happy person. Like, I'm just constitutionally cheerful. And I think that's because, or at least it definitely now at least is in part because I have found joy in God, and I found joy in my relationship, and I found joy in in doing good and being good and having a life where I think I'm moving people in the right direction. Mm-hmm. I finished the book by pointing out that I think that of all the things Christianity has given us, which we alluded to earlier in the show, the thing that really defines Christianity above and beyond all other religions and belief systems is joy. I think that Christians are always just happier than everybody else. Muslims, to me, don't seem very happy. Buddhists can't tell. Who can? It's like no other religion seems to me to be as defined by joy as Christianity is. Whether it's medieval Christians who are always about to burst into laughter, or it's weird gargoyles, or sexually explicit chuntering gargoyles, or whether it's even the cringeworthy Christian rockers or whatever. Christians have a sort of, I think the great gift that Christianity specifically is given to people, and my friend Rachel, the University of Chicago professor, was the first to say this to me. This is not my observation, but it seems one of the truest things that she's ever said to me. It's always stuck with me. Is that the great gift of Christianity seems to be happiness and joy, and for me, the one of the most effective tactics against the bad guys has been to remain cheerful and happy because it just annoys them so much.
Oh yeah,
and, they start bugging out. But also, it's just been an essential self-corrective. Every time I feel a rising sense of injustice about how I've been treated or about how some other group has been treated that I've been writing about by the evil godless progressive left or whatever it is, I've just, the only time I ever lose or come close to losing are the times I forget to laugh, the times I forget to have a smile on my face, and all the time I have a smile on my face, like joy in my heart, I feel invulnerable.
And isn't that, they're a nice counterbalance, aren't they? Maybe you lost when you lose your sense of humor is because you're focusing on the war part of the statement, laughter and war. They really they provide ballast for the other.
Well, the war is obvious. We care about it.
Well, not to some people. A lot of people listening right now get it, but many people, they're living their life in a hammock, reading a magazine, listening to Perry Como. They don't even know there's a war.
They vote every 4 years. Yeah, good for you. Well, say goodbye to your country. Cheerio. Because it's going. Like, wake the hell up or you don't deserve to be reading a magazine. But I take the war as a given. If we're warriors or we're battling, of course, we're at war. But if you don't war with a smile on your face, and if your objective and your tactics are not informed by goodness and grace and joy and integrity and good intentions, right? Mm-hmm. If you're not picking the objects of your assaults and you're not picking the methods, the means by which you intend to win in a joyful way, you deserve to lose and you will lose. And so I think it works in both directions. They inform one another, as you say. And provided that in your heart you have the steel, the grit, the gumption, the heroic manly virtue that comes with knowing that you are at war, at the same time as having the uplifting, the joyful, and the great motivating power of laughter. I mean, nothing makes us move like laughter. Laughter makes us move like no other emotion because it gives us involuntary motion, right?
Yeah, and no other species laughs either. Right.
It's a uniquely human thing, and it is the only emotion we feel that produces involuntary movement. And it can move us to do all kinds of other things too, on purpose and not on purpose. And if we're motivated to do great acts of heroism by the joy we have in our hearts, we can't lose. And so that's why it's my personal motto. And I always try to do, even if it's like little things like I always try to wrap the truth in a good joke or be twice as funny as I am offensive.
That's a proportion that you have to get right?
Twice as funny as offensive, and then you normally get away with it. To also making sure that I'm not being too gratuitously mean, which I know people always worry about with me. And I think I, broadly speaking, am almost always on the right side of that line. But what keeps me in check in both cases and in all other things in my life is laughter and war as an inseparable unit and a life motto. So that's why I picked it.
Well, ending on Bishop Sheen again, he said that this is why atheists have no humor, because they haven't read the book, they don't know how the story comes out, and so they don't see the world as see-through as Catholics do. That's why we call them dense. They have no sense of humor because the world's dense. This material world is all there is. He was a close friend of Chesterton, by the way. He traveled in 1936. Fulton Sheen went to Chesterton's funeral in 1936. He credits him in his last book. If there's one book on the desert island scenario, Milo, of Sheen's, it's his last book. It was published posthumously. It's beautiful. It's called Treasure in Clay, and he writes about his debt to Chesterton. In fact, there's a Chestertonian thing about the way he writes. But I have long extended the anticipated time of our conversation. I really appreciate you opening up and setting the record straight. I'm sorry that I triggered you by having the word straight in the sentence, and I applaud your patience.
Let's not forget mispronouncing Islam, but we're going to let it go. I'm never.
Yeah, well, you mispronounced Khan, isn't it? Khan.
What? Who? What?
Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. Why don't you call him Khan?
It said it can.
Yeah, it opened at can. Can o' worms. All right, Milo, thanks again. I'll put all the links to your book. It's called Diabolical: How Pope Francis Has Betrayed Clerical Abuse Victims Like Me and Why He Has Got to Go, and all the other books and resources that we recommended today at patrickcoffin.media. Thanks, Milo.
Thank you so much.
This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?
Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.